They call it centers of gravity in military parlance. What is the one thing that Russia would not want to lose in this battle? And almost certainly that's Crimea. The port of Sevastopol, it's the only warm water port that Russia has. It's been hugely strategically important for Russia for hundreds of years. Hundreds of thousands of people died to secure it. That will not be something that Russia would want to lose. Now, Ukraine has very effectively targeted the Kerch road rail bridge that links Crimea to the Russian mainland. The only other way in, obviously, is via the land bridge. And if Ukraine has been very effective at targeting the Black Sea Fleet, which effectively has pushed that all the way to the east, if I was looking at a strategy, you might consider that threatening Crimea would be a very, very useful way to force Russia to rethink its strategy. Because, yes, Russia will grind away at the Donbass and potentially gradually take more and more ground. But if it thought it was going to lose Crimea, that would be a strategic failure for Russia. Now, I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that Ukraine would be able to take Crimea. Most military analysts think that would be a very difficult thing to do. But the more you give Ukraine boats, the more you give them long-range missiles, the more that they're successful at keeping the Black Sea Fleet off the battlefield, then the more that option is viable for Ukraine. Now, I reiterate, I have no idea what their strategy would be.
Yeah.
It's simply how do you do something that changes the game and starts to give Ukraine an advantage in what is looking like an increasingly difficult battlefield.
Well, that's interesting. So maybe a combination of using long-range missiles and also raiding crafts, dive boats might be how you would go about attacking Crimea.
So one of the things you'd do is you'd want to sever the Kerch road rail bridge to stop the resupplies coming in. I've had several questions that come to me through the media stuff of people saying, why did Ukraine target it and then stop? Well, one of the explanations for that would be that they wanted to prove they could do it. And once you've proved you can do it, don't keep doing it. Do it when you need to do it. And if you're going to do a coordinated attack against Crimea, you would surgically take out the Kerch road rail bridge, knowing how long it's going to take to recover it. You'd also have a whole series of amphibious attacks. You would take out some of the radar systems and the headquarters on Crimea itself, which the Ukrainians have done. And you would get the Black Sea Fleet away from the area so they couldn't interfere with your potential landing craft and amphibious assault on the island. Now, again, we've no way of knowing, but these are the ingredients that you would probably need. And even if it didn't happen, just the very threat of it could be enough for Russia to rebrigade its military resources to make sure that didn't fall under threat. So it'll be interesting, but bluntly, what Ukraine has to do is got to find a different way of fighting the war, because otherwise the option of liberating Ukraine completely is looking like even more challenging as the days turn into weeks, turn into months.
And so often, in war, we can talk about, so-called glamorous weapons like ATACMS and HIMARS and Patriot defence systems, etc. But fundamentally it comes down to ammunition rounds as well. And it's interesting, the UK saying they're going to provide 4 million ammunition rounds now to Ukraine. I mean, that is desperately needed on the front line, isn't it?
It is, and that's why this combination, you can't. Quantity has a quality all of its own. So bullets and artillery rounds, it is vital. But I reiterate, it's trying to be smart about how you do this stuff. And I always use an analogy that back in the Second World War, we had 1,000 Lancaster bombers doing bombing raids, and each of those Lancasters had 20 bombs on, 20,000 bombs at a time heading off towards Nazi Germany. Do you know what the average miss distance of those bombs was at the time of the Second World War?
No, go on.
4 miles. That's how close, if you were aiming for a target, on average, you got your bombs. So even when you had 20,000 bombs raining down on the target, you still couldn't guarantee to hit it. Today, with technology, one Typhoon jet with 3 bombs can hit 3 targets within a 4-meter accuracy. So all of a sudden, you don't need 20,000 bombs. You need one aircraft with 3 bombs, and you can now pretty much guarantee to hit 3 targets. So the point is, what West technology delivers is a huge multiplying effect. It can be, rather than artillery rounds just flying backwards and forwards across the battlefield, which is what Russia uses. Some chap sat there at his gun all day just firing rounds. If you now start to use battlefield radars, and you can now detect where that round is coming from, you can predict where it's launched from, you can accurately get a grid reference to that point, and now you can deliver a round accurately on that point. Suddenly now, rather than just firing 20,000 rounds a day, Mr. Russian soldier is going to be thinking, next time I fire a round, I'm going to be directly targeted. So that's where, yes, you have to fire bullets and artillery rounds, but smart weapons that's where the game changer is genuinely provided by the West. It's a result at the end of the Second World War. We watched millions of people die on the battlefields, and when there has to be a smarter way of fighting wars, and that's why our Western doctrine is much more around the use of smart weapons. The trouble is they're bloody expensive, and there's not many of them, and you can't nip down to Sainsbury's just to top up the basket when you're low on supplies. That's why industrialization of our industrial base, generating the quantities that are required on a modern battlefield, and that's something we haven't yet done in this country.
And just finally, Sean, do you think that the West has fundamentally changed its attitude when it comes to escalation? Because you're right, one of the big fears with providing various pieces of kit throughout this conflict has been that you would be provoking Russia and effectively declaring full-on war between NATO and Russia. And you sense with every few months, you hear, for example, yes, we will provide tanks, or yes, now we're going to provide attacker missiles or whatever, that is starting to shift, and the fear of escalation is receding, and there is maybe more of an awareness that there will have to be some kind of confrontation with Russia. Is that your analysis, or do you still think there is a very live fear of escalation?
The trouble is, it's a great question, James, because there's part of me that says that at the start of this campaign, the West and Ukraine's fears were aligned. Ukraine wants to liberate its country, but the West have seen a couple of world wars start this way, and therefore containing it early and stopping Putin becoming a threat to the whole of Europe was in everybody's interests. The trouble is today, most military analysts would say that Russia's military capability has been shown to be wanting, that it has lost well over 2,000 main battle tanks. It's had a massive bloody nose against an adversary in Ukraine that, on paper at least, it should have been able to walk over. Is Russia therefore a threat to Europe anymore? Almost certainly no. And therefore there is a risk that suddenly it's, right, we don't need to be involved anymore. Sorry, Ukraine, go and negotiate, call a halt to the war. You've lost some territory, but that's it, and we'll help rebuild the rest of the country. And I think that's really the Trump play. The flip side, which I think is that the danger of Putin succeeding in Ukraine is that will embolden him. And the worry is then, where does that lead you? Where does that leave China's aspirations to Taiwan? And the very fact that Putin keeps threatening political nuclear rhetoric, it's Putin's Russia that invaded Ukraine. He's the bad guy in this. He's the guy who's caused hundreds of thousands of deaths. He's the guy who's caused millions of people to relocate. And yet he's the one who's using threatening rhetoric to tell other people not to get involved, when actually and so far that threatening rhetoric has limited the Western political appetite to directly get involved. But if you stand back from this, he's a school bully. He's threatening to beat somebody up, and we all just cower away. And we throw a few weapons at it and sort of in a bit of an appeasement. I do think there'll be books written about this episode in our European and world history in the future. And my worry is that we'll look back and go, if we had stepped in, even though Putin threatens a much broader war, Putin's Russia would have no chance at all if NATO was to put a no-fly zone in to protect Ukraine, not take on Russia in a war, but simply protect Ukraine and say, you can't get away with this. A powerful message to anywhere in the world. Russia wouldn't have an answer to it. And even Russia's doctrine doesn't talk about nuclear weapons in such a regard. It's one thing to threaten it, and it has scared people in the West. But bluntly, if you follow that through, you're giving license to bullies around the world to do whatever they want to do. In my book, That just can't be right.
Thank you for watching Frontline for Times Radio. For more on global security and the war in Ukraine, you can listen to Times Radio, take out a digital subscription to The Times, and click subscribe on our YouTube channel.